My name is Teresa Reyna. I am a junior at the University of Dallas in Irving. I'm a CS major and I plan on getting a master's in cybersecurity and working in the industry in the future. So this project is about software safety standards for data protection and prevention of data loss or theft. So a very quick explanation on data protection. Data protection ensures that personal information is not compromised on the web. There are a variety of software standards put in place in the data protection market that guide developers through the software development process for social media, cloud computing, etc. The main three standards for data protection involve authentication, authorization, and data integrity. These standards make sure that data management services properly secure confidential information so that there are no unnecessary agents accessing it or harming it. Companies that are involved in data protection will often use basic data privacy and protections techniques such as encryption, implementing access control, using firewalls, etc. An introduction. Why is data protection important, or why should data protection standards be studied and analyzed, is because data breaches compromise the reputation of multi-millionaire corporations that promise to prioritize quality data protection to the consumer. When millions of people's data is leaked, the consequences can be long-term and devastating, as well as leading to financial losses not only for consumers, but also for these corporations. Juniper's research forecast predicted that data breaches and cybercrime will cost businesses trillions of dollars in the future. So this project, or what I focused on this summer, is categorizing different data protection standards and what they demand, as well as using real-life examples of data privacy issues and classifications. The conclusion will address how current data protection standards can be made more understandable by analyzing how they can be improved. Major data breaches that occurred recently is Yahoo's reported 500 million accounts stolen in 2016, which later added up to be up to 3 billion affected people/accounts. In 2021, T-Mobile discovered 47 million compromised accounts after a major data breach. In 2019, 419 million Facebook accounts were before leaked in the UK database. And again in 2021, 533 million records of Facebook users were compromised. And in 2020, Microsoft had a 250 million record loss of customer support information. So what's common about these data breaches? Well, they all occur due to improper data loss prevention techniques and a failure to adhere to data loss prevention standards. All the information that is compromised in these data breaches include people's names, emails, passwords, finances, as in like what they make on the internet, their bank information, even their social security numbers, their phone numbers, their identification cards, and driver licenses, basically any form of legitimate identification that can be used maliciously is compromised in these data breaches. So classifying data leaks and corresponding them to DLP standards. This is what I found was the most very common way that data leaks can be identified. So what causes data leaks is the participant, the intention of the participant, and the procedure that the participant either abuses or utilizes to initialize the data breach. So important questions to ask before getting into data loss prevention standards is to think about whether the participant is an internal or external agent. Was the data accessed from the inside or the outside? Was the identity of the participant a legitimate party or an unauthorized party, being like an employee or a hacker? Was the intent of the data breach something that was deliberate or unintentional? As in, like, employees can sometimes unintentionally or even be blackmailed into revealing sensitive information to third parties. Is a leak a repeating occurrence? This also kind of brings light into the nature of the data leak. Was it a technological leak or a non-technological leak? And the procedure. So when data breaches happen, what were the procedures that were in place at the time that monitored data? Was the data protection procedures automatic or manual? Is the data stored, encrypted, visible, or hidden? These are important questions. So when you apply these classifications to data leak, for example, the data leak of 2021, you can identify several very important points. For example, the participant or the cause of data leak of T-Mobile 2021 was externally hacking into T-Mobile's databases. The participant's access points were also external, as he conducted most of the data breach through his own laptop. The participant was an unauthorized third party who looked for vulnerabilities using his own internet network. The participant intentionally aimed to retrieve valuable data and sell it to malicious third parties. The participant was able to get away with this breach because T-Mobile had multiple unsecured routers that failed to detect the intruder. The participant gained access to a main data center where there were no procedures that were able to automatically stop him or detect him. Categorizing data breaches into a couple of main components and issues helps software developers integrate an improved data loss prevention protocol into their software. These criteria and characteristics can directly be linked to data protection standards such as authentication, authorization, and data integrity. So software standards for data protection include very multi-layered approaches for security. They also can be called confidentiality, availability, auditability, accountability, etc. So authentication. Security approaches that integrate authentication assure that whoever is accessing the data is the true agent. Authentication software identifies unique users through credentials like emails, usernames, and passwords. These things prove that whoever is accessing the data is who they say they are. So what is required to integrate proper authentication? Well, very common ones are preventing shared and repeating credentials, requiring two-factor security, monitoring attempts of unauthorized access, and to kind of apply this to a real-life example, we can go to the 2021 Facebook data breach where user credentials were not properly protected. To make sure authentication is properly integrated into a web-based software, these verifications are integral for authentication. The listed Facebook breach reveals a failure of authentication. Weak credential verification leads to a variety of exposed data such as passwords, keys, session tokens that allow exploitations, and just overall these flaws can help scammers assume the identity of legitimate agents. An incredibly overlooked way that malicious participants become successful in data breaches is through account or service hijacking. When usernames and passwords are reused across many platforms, the severity of data threats greatly increases. Accounts can be easily hijacked if an individual often uses the same credentials. The CSA discerns if an attacker gains access to your credentials, they can eavesdrop on your activities and transactions, manipulate data, return falsified information, and redirect your clients to illegitimate sites. This is why all data services or management services should encourage authentication and uphold it as their standard, and encourage safe credential information requiring unique usernames, certain password criteria, and not allowing repeating passwords after credentials have been changed. Authorization protects critical resources in a system by limiting access only to authorized users and their applications. It prevents the unauthorized use of a resource or the use of a resource in an unauthorized manner. So what is required for authorization? Well, typically usernames and passwords are another way, or a very common way, obviously, to integrate authorization. Secure sockets layers help make internet web browsing authentic and just reliable. Diversity in account privileges is basically limiting database access to only those who absolutely need to access it. This way, security isn't spread so thin. Identity and access management and biometric authentication. So a real-life example is the 2020 Microsoft breach, where the customer support database was accidentally and wrongly put in the public domain. Wrongful management of authorization protocols results in technical unauthorized users being able to access confidential data. Base access control is the standard for authorization, but can be improved with biometrics and renewed structural standards and identity and access management. A proper identity and access management procedure can avoid major loss of data availability. This technique ties both authentication and authorization. Identity and access management manages the digital identity of the human or non-human agent, and this ensures that whoever's accessing any resources is being oriented to the right direction and the correct data through identity intelligence and frameworks. Data integrity and non-repudiation mechanisms detect whether unauthorized modification of data has occurred. Computation integrity means that program execution should be kept from malware or malicious use that could change a program execution and corrupt data. So what is required for data integrity? Well, certificate authorities are a very big thing in web encryption standards, encryption, behavioral analysis. Again, identity and access management is also good for data integrity. Various encryption standards, third-party auditing, and service level agreements. A real-life example is the Twitch 2021 data leak, where encryption keys were accidentally leaked into the source code and therefore able to be accessed by malicious third parties. So there are several standards for data integrity, as I just explained. What is required for data integrity is a good algorithm that utilizes third-party auditors, because these third parties are more specialized and skilled and experienced in data integrity. Amazon uses one of the strongest encryption algorithms being the 256-bit AES, and that is a third-party encryption key. A very popular way businesses can officially verify their data integrity status is through certificate authorities. A certificate authority is a third-party trusted business partner that issues certificates to assure the integrity of encryption keys and verifies the ownership of them. A certificate authority keeps a list of all certificates and keeps tabs on them for when they expire and when they are used. Digital certificates provide protection against impersonation because digital certificates bind a public key to its owner. Digital certificates are also known as public key certificates because they provide assurance about the ownership of a public key. So these certificates are also placed in lists, and every time these digital certificates are revoked, they're placed into a CRL, which is a certificate revocation list, and it helps people who look at this list identify whether the encryption keys they're using are maintain data integrity or whether they do not. How can data loss prevention techniques go further? These standards do not need to constrict themselves to authentication, authorization, and integrity, although they are the standard as they are the most common approaches to data loss prevention. These standards should also be evaluated and expanded with a more in-depth analysis. Recently, a lot of researchers have conducted a similar analysis and divided these standards to two major data loss prevention approaches, being context-based analysis and content-based analysis. Context-based analysis identifies sensitive files by the surrounding data, and content-based analysis scans data to identify sensitive information. Content-based analysis is like watermarks or biometrics. Context-based analysis is like behavioral analysis, machine learning, and artificial intelligence to be more proactive against data breaches. These techniques can take authentication, authorization, and integrity further in the industry by, as I said, being preventative and proactive. And if you are interested in furthering your knowledge about data loss prevention techniques, this is definitely the approach to go. And that's it. That's the end of my presentation.